If you beat him, I'll marry you.
Veronica Hale's heel struck the metal floor as she sneered, "Move, janitor! You're smearing filth all over my track!" And the words cracked through the air like a whip. The moment they left her lips, something in the silence hinted that one day she would choke on those same syllables. The evening garage of the Monte Carlo Formula One circuit glowed with industrial lights, humming above rows of precision tools, carbon fiber bodywork, and the sacred smell of fuel clinging to every surface, as if the entire place were holding its breath before the weekend's qualifying runs. Veronica, CEO of Orion Dynamics and the team's ruthless new majority investor, stood like she owned the concrete beneath her stilettos, her icy blue suit sharp enough to cut glass, her expression colder than the steel line of the pit wall. Across from her, pushing a battered yellow mop bucket, stood Jamal Brooks, the night shift janitor whose quiet presence always blended into the background, until now, when her voice stamped him underfoot in front of half a dozen mechanics who froze in an uncomfortable semicircle. Jamal stopped, the mop handle trembling in his hands, though his eyes stayed steady, dark and calm, reflecting the neon glow of the garage as if absorbing the insult rather than deflecting it. Veronica rolled her eyes dramatically, brushing an invisible speck of dust off her cuff, her diamond bracelet catching the light like a flashbang meant to blind anyone beneath her level. "Honestly," she continued, letting her words drip with disdain, "if you can't clean without turning the floor into a swamp, maybe you should go back to whatever hole they dragged you out of." A couple of the younger mechanics winced subtly, shifting their weight, glancing at Jamal with an unspoken apology that their cowardice kept trapped behind tight lips. Jamal swallowed slowly, the motion barely visible, but the silence afterward felt like something fragile had cracked inside him. The garage door rumbled as a red and black Orion F1 car was pushed past, its engine ticking softly with cooling metal, the scent of burnt rubber drifting like a ghost between them, amplifying the tension. Veronica stepped closer, heels clacking with the deliberate rhythm of dominance, her perfume something sharp, expensive, invasive cutting through the grease and fuel air as she gestured mockingly at the wet floor. "Look at this. Pathetic. I run billion-dollar operations, and I'm expected to tolerate incompetence from someone who can't even mop in a straight line?" Her voice rose enough for echoes to cling to the rafters. Someone from the back muttered, "Damn, that's rough," but no one dared say it louder. Veronica's reputation for firing people as casually as breathing was well known. Jamal lifted his eyes at last, not confrontationally, but with a quiet dignity that made Veronica's lip curl in irritation. "Ma'am," he began softly, "I'm doing my job. I didn't mean to be in your way." "You exist in my way," she snapped, leaning in with venomous satisfaction, one manicured finger poking the air inches from his chest. "People like you don't belong anywhere near precision engineering. You're a liability with a mop, let alone near my team." A murmur rippled through the bystanders' embarrassment, discomfort, maybe even shame on her behalf. But Veronica thrived on the power imbalance, feeding on it as naturally as breathing. Jamal's jaw tightened. Not enough to be noticed by someone looking only for weakness, but enough to hint at something simmering beneath the surface, a storm gathering behind an otherwise quiet sky. He didn't speak, though the air around him felt charged, as if words unsaid were heavier than the mop in his hand. Veronica tilted her head with a cruel smile. "Oh, don't sulk. If you want to impress me, try something useful." Her eyes slid past him toward the group of mechanics standing a few feet away, and she raised her voice theatrically. "In fact, let's make this fun. If one of you boys can beat our janitor here arm wrestling, I don't care how you know what." She paused dramatically, savoring the attention, her lips stretching into a wicked smirk. "I'll marry the winner." The men exchanged stunned looks, half confused, half horrified. but Veronica shrugged as though offering the deal of a lifetime rather than dangling human dignity as a toy. Jamal's breath caught, his fingers tightening white-knuckled around the mop handle, humiliation washing over him in a slow, suffocating wave. Someone laughed nervously, another coughed to hide discomfort. A third whispered, "Is she serious?" But Veronica was already basking in the chaos she had created, her confidence radiating like a poisonous sun. She flicked her wrist as if dismissing an insect. "Well, anyone? He looks like he'll fall apart if you breathe on him." The words struck Jamal harder than any physical shove, but he didn't flinch. He simply stood there, absorbing every shard of the moment, every snicker, every averted gaze, every twist of humiliation the scene forced onto him. The garage felt smaller, the lights harsher, the sound of tools clattering in the distance strangely amplified, as if the world itself had decided to witness his disgrace. Veronica chuckled under her breath, stepping back with theatrical annoyance when Jamal didn't respond. "Ugh, forget it. He's not worth the time." Then she added with a smirk sharp enough to wound, "Some people were born to stay on their knees, and some of us were born to own the floor they mop." The words hung in the air like a blade, and though Jamal didn't react outwardly, something deep in his expression shifted. Something quiet, steady, and frighteningly certain, as if the insult had awakened a force he'd buried long ago. No one noticed, not yet. But the silence that followed crackled with the faintest whisper of fate rearranging itself, waiting for its moment to strike. The tension from the confrontation lingered in the air long after Veronica Hale strutted away, her stilettos clicking down the pit lane like a taunt that refused to fade, and with every echo the humiliation around Jamal Brooks seemed to thicken, spreading through the garage like smoke that clung to every surface. The mechanics tried to return to their tasks, pretending to focus on torque readings and wing adjustments, but their eyes kept wandering back to Jamal, standing frozen beside his mop bucket, breathing slowly as if each inhale burned. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting harsh reflections on the polished floor that made the whole scene feel sterile and exposed, like a surgical theater where everyone was afraid to cut. A tall mechanic named Lucas cleared his throat, rubbing his palms on his jumpsuit before approaching Jamal hesitantly, his voice low so Veronica somewhere across the garage taking a call wouldn't hear. "Hey, man. Sorry about that," he muttered, eyes soft with guilt. But the apology wasn't enough to shield Jamal from the stares gathering around him now that the spell of Veronica's presence had lifted. A pair of junior technicians whispered near the toolbox wall, glancing at him nervously. A social media intern, always hanging around the team, raised her phone just enough to catch the aftermath on video, her expression torn between shock and the irresistible pull of online drama. Even the sound of compressed air hissing from a pneumatic wrench felt mocking, punctuating the silence like an audience reacting to a particularly harsh punchline. Jamal forced a thin smile at Lucas. "It's fine," he said, though the words came out stiff, scraped raw by the humiliation still prickling under his skin. Lucas shook his head. "No, it's not. She's been on everyone's case since she took over. But that..." He exhaled sharply. "That was another level." Before Jamal could respond, another mechanic, short, wiry, always too eager to impress, approached the group with a crooked grin. Leon was his name, and he thrived on attention wherever he could find it. "You all saw it, right?" he announced to anyone listening. "CEO Hale offering her hand in marriage like it's some medieval tournament prize?" He snorted. "She's out of her mind, but damn, what a show." A few people chuckled weakly, some out of nerves, others because Leon's loud presence forced reactions from them. Jamal stiffened, knowing full well the mockery wasn't aimed at Veronica. It was aimed at the idea of him ever being considered in the same universe as the wealthy, razor-tongued CEO. Leon elbowed Lucas. Imagine marrying a woman like that. You'd have to fight just to breathe around her. Then his eyes slid toward Jamal with a smirk that held no kindness. Though I guess our mop wizard here wasn't exactly on her list of contenders. The laugh that followed wasn't loud, but it was enough to land like a slap. Jamal felt heat creep up his neck, and he turned away, gripping the mop handle so tightly his knuckles ached. The bucket sloshed beside him, water rippling like it mirrored his frustration. The intern with the phone edged closer, angling for a clearer shot. "People online are going to eat this up," she whispered, and Jamal realized with a sinking feeling that his humiliation wasn't staying inside this garage. By morning it might be dissected, commented on, memed. The thought made his stomach twist. Veronica's voice rose suddenly from across the pit lane, sharp and commanding as she barked orders at a pair of engineers who rushed to her like soldiers summoned to the front lines. She pointed aggressively at a tablet screen lap times or performance analytics, judging by the colors, and her frustration sliced through the hum of machinery. "You think this is acceptable?" she snapped. "We're losing milliseconds because someone can't configure a basic energy recovery mapping. Fix it. Fix it now." The engineers scattered, leaving Veronica alone, tapping her heel impatiently as she scanned the garage like a queen surveying her subjects, looking for her next target. Her gaze flicked over Jamal briefly, and her smirk returned, the kind that suggested she'd already forgotten the specifics of humiliating him, but remembered how good it had felt. Witnesses exchanged glances again. Some looked at Jamal with sympathy. Others avoided his eyes out of self-preservation. A middle-aged mechanic named Duarte approached quietly, the lines on his face deepened by years of racing season exhaustion. "Ignore her," he murmured, placing a gentle hand on Jamal's shoulder. "Some people think power is a personality." His accent softened the harshness of his words, but nothing could soften the sting of being publicly reduced to nothing. Jamal nodded, though inside the humiliation burned hotter. Every sound in the garage seemed sharper now, the squeal of a hose, the clang of a wrench dropped on concrete, the distant roar of an engine being tested on a dyno. Each noise added another layer to the suffocating atmosphere pressing in around him. Someone called out from the adjoining bay, "Did you see her face when he didn't react? She wanted him to brake." Another voice replied, "Would have been easier for everyone if he did." The implication hung in the air. Easier for them, not for him. Jamal's hands tightened again. He felt every look, every whisper, every unspoken judgment. He was the weak one, the outsider, the man without power or voice in a world built on speed, money, and ruthless ambition. And Veronica had made sure of it. As he leaned down to wring out the mop, water dripped onto the floor in slow, deliberate beats, like a ticking clock marking the seconds of his shame. But deep beneath the slow-burning humiliation, something else began to simmer. Not anger, not yet, but a quiet resolve, heavy and solid, like a weight shifting inside his chest. He didn't know what he could do, not in this moment, not with everyone watching, but he knew one thing. This wouldn't be the end of the story. Not for him. Not for her. Not after what she'd done tonight. And though no one around him noticed, Jamal straightened just slightly, his shoulders squaring under the fluorescent lights as if preparing unknowingly for a storm none of them saw coming. Jamal Brooks finished wringing out the mop, but inside his chest, something heavier than water twisted and tightened, reminding him of every step that had brought him to this unforgiving garage. And for a moment the noise around him faded as his mind drifted back to the pieces of a life he rarely allowed himself to visit. Before he was a janitor sweeping the corners of an F1 pit lane, he had been a kid in a cramped Atlanta apartment, racing homemade toy cars down hallways with his older brother Malcolm, dreaming of engines he'd only ever see on posters taped to chipped drywall. Malcolm had been the star, then fast, fearless, always pushing limits, his talent behind a wheel so raw and brilliant it felt unfair for anyone else to compete. Jamal had always followed, studying the mechanics rather than the glory, pulling apart old radios, bikes, anything he could get his hands on, trying to understand the language of machinery. It was Malcolm who dragged him into karting, who saved every spare dollar to get them on a track, who told him, grinning under a cracked helmet, "You don't gotta be the driver to be part of the race. Little man, engines listen to people like you." Their bond, forged in gasoline and laughter, lasted until the night everything shattered. Malcolm's crash had been as sudden as it was devastating, a local street race, a momentary miscalculation, a skid on slick pavement, headlights cutting too close. Jamal still remembered the sickening crunch, the phone call, the weight of grief that pulled the world out from under him. After that, he worked any job he could find, dishwasher, warehouse loader, night cleaner, to help his mother keep the lights on, burying his dreams under obligations and exhaustion. But dreams, especially the stubborn ones carved into childhood bones, never die quietly. And when he found a job opening at the Monte Carlo circuit, low-paying, unglamorous night shifts only, he'd grabbed it with both hands, because even holding a mop within the walls of the racing world felt like standing closer to something he'd once loved. Still, working beneath the shimmering wealth of the paddock reminded him daily how far he was from belonging. He kept his head down, worked quietly, saved bits of discarded carbon fiber like relics, and sometimes paused during late-night shifts just to listen to the echo of engines being tested in the distance, letting the vibrations pulse through him like memories of a life he'd nearly forgotten. And though no one else saw it, that quiet fascination made him incredibly good at what he did. He heard things others didn't, noticed details others overlooked, felt the subtle rhythms of the garage like a second heartbeat. It wasn't expertise born from training, but from instinct, years of tinkering, and a mind that understood machines the way other people understood language. He became the janitor who could fix a misaligned hinge without being asked, who tightened a loose bolt on a storage rack before it fell, who subtly adjusted a tool cart everyone thought just magically rolled smoother afterward. Not that Veronica Hale would ever care. The new CEO, with her designer suits and ruthless reputation, had swept into the team like a storm, demanding excellence while offering none of the humanity that usually kept a workplace from collapsing under fear. She wasn't born into motorsport. She'd bought her way into it, carving her place through acquisitions and power plays, substituting connection with control. People obeyed her not out of respect, but survival. And people like Jamal, people without titles, without pedigree, were nothing more than background props in her kingdom. Yet beneath Jamal's quiet, almost invisible exterior was something Veronica had never bothered to notice. Resilience forged under pressure, patience learned from loss, and a kind of endurance that came from surviving life's harsher blows long before stepping into this garage. He didn't carry himself like a man broken by circumstances. He carried himself like someone who'd had to rebuild too many times to be easily shattered again. Still, no amount of internal strength softened the way he felt tonight. The humiliation carved into him by Veronica's words reverberated through his memories, scraping against old wounds. Moments when customers snapped at him like he was furniture, when supervisors docked wages without explanation, when people assumed weakness because of his job, his clothes, his place in the hierarchy. But never not once had it cut quite like tonight. Because something about standing in this garage, this place tied to dreams and ghosts, made the insult heavier, crueler, like she'd spit directly on the last fragile piece of hope he still carried. He closed his eyes briefly, drawing in a slow breath that tasted like oil and metal and regret. His mother's voice echoed faintly in his mind. "You can't let the world decide your value, baby. That's how it wins." And Malcolm's laughter followed, warm, reckless, believing. "Stand tall, little man, even when you're tired, especially then." When Jamal opened his eyes, the world snapped back into focus. Mechanics were still working, whispering, glancing at him, unsure what to say. The social media intern had finally stowed her phone, though the damage might already be done. And Veronica, in the distance, continued giving commands as if her cruelty earlier had been nothing more than entertainment. Jamal wasn't angry yet, not fully. Rage wasn't something he let himself indulge in. It was dangerous, unpredictable, something he'd always feared might consume more than it solved. But tonight, beneath layers of quiet endurance, something shifted inside him. Not a spark of fury, but a realization. He had always accepted his place in the shadows, believing that staying small, invisible, safe was the only way to survive. But today, for the first time, he felt the weight of that invisibility chafe. He wasn't powerless, not in the way she assumed. He wasn't fragile, not in the way the mechanics believed. He had skills, instincts, and a lifetime of watching engines like they were living things. And life had already thrown worse at him than Veronica Hale and her mocking smirk. For the first time in years, he felt the faintest tug of something like defiance. It didn't show on his face, not yet, but it straightened his spine, sharpened his breath, and planted the first seed of an idea he didn't yet understand. He didn't know how, or when, or why. But something inside told him this wasn't going to end the way Veronica expected. And as the sounds of the garage swelled around him, Jamal returned to his work not broken, but quietly preparing for a moment he didn't yet realize was coming. A moment when the world would finally see more than the man with a mop. Veronica Hale's aggression didn't simmer down as the night deepened. If anything, the tension sharpened, as though she had tasted power earlier and now craved a second bite, prowling the pit lane with cold precision, heels clicking like the ticking hands of a bomb counting down to something inevitable. She stalked between workstations, snapping at engineers for marginal errors, criticizing data with vicious efficiency, and ignoring the tired, drained faces around her. Every so often, her gaze flicked toward Jamal, lingering just long enough to remind him and everyone else that humiliation was only a breath away. "Unbelievable," she muttered loudly enough for nearby techs to hear, waving a hand toward him as he disinfected tool trays. A world-class racing team held hostage by sloppy janitorial work. Is it too much to expect professionalism from someone whose entire job is pushing a mop? The words hit their mark, drawing uncomfortable stares toward Jamal, who forced himself to keep cleaning, knuckles whitening on the rag. The mechanics exchanged glances, silently agreeing they wanted no part of Veronica's wrath, but their silence only made her cruelty more brazen. She thrived on power imbalance, on the way her voice filled the room, on the way no one dared challenge her. She strutted closer to Jamal, arms crossed, the edge of her tailored blazer brushing the air like a threat, and stopped inches behind him, letting her presence loom. "Careful," she said with exaggerated concern. "Don't scratch the equipment. You break it, and that's your entire yearly salary gone in one swipe." Behind her, Leon snorted under his breath and whispered, "Like he even knows what half this stuff does." Another mechanic elbowed him lightly in warning, but the damage was done. Jamal's jaw clenched, and he inhaled sharply, willing himself not to react. Veronica smirked, sensing the tension. "What's that expression?" she taunted. "Don't tell me you're upset." "You got your feelings bruised earlier?" Poor thing. She made a show of inspecting her nails, perfectly polished, each gleaming like a small mirror reflecting her own smugness. Then she tilted her head toward Leon. "Actually, you know what? I'm still bored. Let's revisit my little challenge." A murmur rippled through the garage. Some mechanics froze mid-task. "Ms. Hale," Lucas began carefully, but she raised a single eyebrow, slicing him into silence. "No objections," she said, turning sharply to face them. "Unless any of you suddenly discovered a spine." Her words bounced off metal and concrete, daring anyone to oppose her. None did. "Thought so," she said with bitter satisfaction. Her gaze landed on Leon, who stiffened like a spotlight had pinned him. You, she said, pointing at him with an elegant, predatory gesture. You look like you could give our mop boy a run for his money. Arm wrestling. Simple. Fast. Entertaining. Leon forced a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. Sure, but nothing, Veronica snapped, stepping closer, her perfume slicing through the air again. Unless you're afraid you'll lose to someone paid minimum wage. A ripple of uneasy chuckles passed through the room, the kind born from fear, not humor. Jamal felt heat rise in his chest, humiliation tightening like a fist around his lungs. He hadn't agreed to anything, hadn't spoken a word, yet his mere presence was being tossed around like a toy in Veronica's games. He opened his mouth to say something, anything, but Veronica cut him off with a dismissive wave. No need to thank me, janitor. I'm giving you a chance to prove you're not entirely useless. She gestured to the nearest workbench. Sit, both of you. Jamal didn't move. The garage held its breath. Veronica's eyes narrowed, icy and lethal. Is there a problem? Her voice dipped into that dangerous register everyone recognized, the one that meant jobs could be lost in seconds. Jamal swallowed. Ms. Hale, he said quietly but firmly, I don't want to participate in whatever this is. Veronica laughed a sharp, metallic sound. Oh, darling, you don't have a choice. You forfeited the moment you decided to mop near my path. Her tone dripped with poisonous delight as she stepped even closer, so close he could see the glint of challenge in her pupils. Sit down. Her voice dropped to a hiss. Unless you're scared. That word hit harder than any insult before it. Scared. Weak. Small. Around him the crowd shifted. Duarte frowned deeply. Lucas looked horrified. Even Leon no longer seemed amused. The atmosphere tightened like a vice around Jamal's ribs. He glanced around, everyone watching, judging, waiting. His pulse hammered. The humiliation already felt unbearable, but refusing in front of everyone would make him look exactly the way Veronica described. Powerless. His mother's voice echoed faintly. Don't let the world decide your value. Yet he felt trapped, cornered, suffocating under her scrutiny. Slowly, painfully, he lowered himself into the chair at the bench. Leon followed reluctantly, clearly unhappy to be dragged into this. Veronica clapped her hands once, delighted. Excellent! Entertain me! She leaned on the workstation, eyes gleaming with cruel anticipation. Jamal placed his elbow on the table, his hand steady but his stomach twisting. Leon mirrored him, his grip hesitant. On 3, Veronica purred. 1, her voice curled like smoke. 2, she locked eyes with Jamal, savoring his discomfort. 3, but before she could finish, she paused, lips curling. Actually, wait. She leaned in closer, voice soft but lethal. Let's make it interesting. If he loses... Her gaze slid over Jamal as if appraising livestock. He apologizes to the whole garage for wasting everyone's time tonight. Jamal felt a cold wave crash over him, humiliation deepening, hardening, becoming something darker. Veronica continued. And if he wins... She snorted, dismissing the idea. Well, that won't happen. The room buzzed with tension, a pressure so thick it felt like the walls themselves were leaning in. Jamal's fingers curled slowly around Leon's hand. Something inside him, something quiet and buried twisted into place with the finality of a locked gear. Not anger yet, but something close, a promise to himself. Veronica raised her chin, cold and triumphant. Now, 3. The moment Veronica Hale's sharp Three sliced through the garage. Leon drove his weight forward, slamming his strength into Jamal's hand with far more force than anyone expected, the kind that sent a shock up Jamal's arm and jolted his shoulder, making the table rattle against the concrete floor as several mechanics jumped back instinctively. The sudden violence of the match drew gasps, and the tension skyrocketed as both men strained, their locked hands trembling violently in the glare of fluorescent lights. Jamal gritted his teeth, his muscles screaming under the pressure, the tendons in his arm tightening like cables pulled to the brink of snapping, and for a moment, the humiliation from earlier felt like it was crushing him physically, not metaphorically. Leon wasn't playing casually anymore. Embarrassment and fear of disappointing Veronica had ignited something competitive and desperate in him, and he leaned in with his entire torso, jaw clenched, sweat already forming at his temple as he growled under his breath, "Just go down, man. Don't make this worse." The words dug under Jamal's skin like barbs, fueling a flicker of the anger he'd tried so hard to smother. But no amount of emotion could change the fact that Leon had leverage, mass, and training on his side, while Jamal had only raw endurance and stubbornness. Veronica watched with predatory delight, her smile stretching as she saw Jamal's arm falter, the back of his hand tilting dangerously close to the table's surface. "This won't take long," she announced smugly, her voice rising just enough for the entire garage crowded now, with curious team members from other bays to hear. People stopped what they were doing. Engineers paused mid-calibration. Tire specialists leaned over wheels. The data analytics team froze behind their monitors, and even a couple of rival team members passing by peeked into the chaos, drawn by the tension like moths toward flame. The garage lights buzzed overhead, and the smell of burning rubber from a nearby test run drifted through the air, making the atmosphere even sharper, more volatile. Jamal's breath came in short bursts, his shoulder shaking, his grip slipping millimeter by millimeter as Leon continued to push with relentless force, driven by the fear of losing not just a challenge, but Veronica's approval. "Come on, Leon!" someone called out from the crowd. "Finish it!" Another voice chimed in. "He's dead tired already!" And then someone else added cruelly, "What did you expect? He's a janitor, not an athlete." The words stung, but Jamal barely heard them over the roaring pulse in his ears. His fingers burned, his muscles trembled uncontrollably, and for a terrifying second, his wrist bent so far back he felt a bolt of pain shoot up to his elbow. Leon grinned as he sensed the advantage, pushing harder, his forearm bulging with effort. "Told you," Veronica murmured, stepping close enough that Jamal could feel the heat of her presence without even seeing her. "Some people are built for greatness, some for cleaning up after them." The humiliation clawed through him, threatening to break more than just his arm, but in that moment of emotional collapse, another memory surged into his mind, the image of Malcolm leaning over a cart engine, grinning, telling him, "Machines push limits, little man. People push back." Jamal's breath steadied just slightly, but enough to give him one more second of resistance. Leon, sensing the hesitation, snarled and applied a final burst of strength, slamming his shoulder forward, and Jamal's arm dipped to within a hair's width of defeat. The garage erupted shouts, gasps, cheers, murmurs, as the outcome became inevitable. "That's it!" someone yelled. "It's over!" "Drop him!" another voice shouted eagerly. Veronica smirked with satisfaction, already turning her head as if bored now that her prediction was moments from becoming reality. "Any last words before he breaks you?" she asked, her tone dripping with mock concern. Jamal couldn't answer. He could barely breathe under the crushing weight of Leon's force. His vision blurred, the edges of the room dimming, but he could still hear the voices, the laughter, the disbelief in the crowd. And then, as if fate wanted to carve the humiliation deeper, Leon leaned forward and whispered, "Should have stayed invisible, man." Those words cut deeper than anything Veronica had said, deeper than the pain in his arm, deeper than the fear of losing. Invisible. That's what they all thought he was. That's what he had allowed himself to become. Something inside him twisted sharply, painfully, snapping tight like a chain pulled too far. His fingers, slick with sweat, almost slipped completely from Leon's grip, and the table rattled from the sheer force pressing them down, the sound echoing through the garage like the crack of a starting light. His arm hovered a fraction of an inch from defeat, and then the world paused. Every voice, every breath, every vibration in the garage suspended in a single, suffocating moment. Jamal's entire body trembled violently, his arm threatening to collapse. Leon pushed harder, sensing victory. Veronica watched, eyes bright with triumph. The crowd leaned in, the air thick with anticipation. Jamal was done, finished. He had no chance, no leverage, no strength left, and everyone knew it. Everyone except the part of him that refused to break. Not now, not like this, not in front of the dream Malcolm died chasing, not in front of the sport that shaped him, not in front of the woman who looked at him like he was dirt under her shoe. That buried part, the one he'd spent years ignoring, stirred, pressed against the edges of his consciousness and whispered, "Not yet." The pressure grew, crushing, final. Leon roared with effort, Jamal gasped, and the entire garage braced for the end. Just as the crushing weight of Leon's arm seemed moments from slamming Jamal's hand flat against the table, the world around him narrowed into a tunnel of soundless pressure, the crowd's shouts fading, until all he could hear was the frantic pounding of his own pulse and the faint mechanical whine of an engine idling somewhere deep in the garage. Yet beneath those sounds, something else stirred, a memory layered so deeply into his bones that it felt less like recollection and more like instinct waking. The pressure on his wrist intensified, pain lancing up his arm like fire. But just when the agony threatened to break him, Malcolm's voice resurfaced with startling clarity. Not in grief, not in mourning, but in the tone he'd used on nights when he was still alive, hunched over a cart chassis with a wrench in hand, teaching Jamal everything the world never cared to show them. "Engines talk, little man," Malcolm had said once, tapping a cylinder with a confident knuckle. "You listen close enough, you hear what others don't. Racing isn't just strength, it's timing, rhythm, patience. Feel that, and you can outdrive anyone." The words didn't make sense in an arm wrestling match, yet the memory clicked into place like a gear finding its slot, and suddenly Jamal realized he wasn't fighting Leon's strength. He was fighting his own exhaustion and fear. Leon was strong, sure, but he was reckless, emotional, already burning through his reserves with every aggressive surge. Jamal's pain didn't fade. It just sharpened into something manageable, something that felt like the familiar sting of scraped knuckles from years of tinkering with engines, something that reminded him he'd survived far worse than a mechanic with a bruised ego. Yet the true shift, the real spark, came not from memory, but from something entirely unexpected. A voice behind the crowd, authoritative yet strangely calm, called out, "Stop! Enough!" It wasn't Veronica's voice, though she stiffened at the sound. Heads turned, whispers spreading through the garage. A tall man stepped from the shadows between two bays, wearing a charcoal gray team jacket with the Orion Dynamics crest stitched discreetly on the chest, though no one had seen him anywhere near the garage earlier. He wasn't part of the regular engineering staff, nor media, nor any of the recognizable executives. His posture held the easy confidence of someone used to command, and his eyes dark, observant, fixed on the match with an intensity that made Leon waver, even as he continued pushing down. "Who's that?" someone whispered. "He doesn't look like crew." "Is he FIA?" someone else murmured. But Veronica's expression flickered with something sharp and frustrated, the kind of annoyance she reserved for people who outranked her. She straightened abruptly, stepping away from the table as the stranger approached. "You're interrupting a team-building exercise," she said sharply, but her voice lacked the bite it usually carried. The stranger ignored her. He moved closer to the table, his eyes assessing the scene with a precision that didn't match the chaos of an impromptu arm wrestling match. His gaze lingered on Jamal not with pity, not with mockery, but with an unreadable calculation, as though he recognized something no one else saw. That alone sent a strange chill through the room. "This has gone too far," the man said quietly, but the quietness only made the words hit harder, rippling through the watching crowd and even making Leon hesitate, his push faltering for half a second. Veronica bristled. "Who are you to decide that?" she snapped. The stranger finally looked at her, and the weight of that gaze seemed to slam into the air itself. "Someone who cares about this team's integrity more than its theatrics." The room stiffened. Veronica's smile tightened, brittle. "This is none of your concern." "Everything that happens in my garage is my concern," the man replied, and his tone, calm, firm, finally revealed who he was before anyone said it out loud. A murmur spread rapidly. "Wait, no way." "That's him? He wasn't supposed to arrive until tomorrow." Someone whispered, "That's Daniel Brooks." And just like that, the whisper became a shockwave. Daniel Brooks, legendary F1 race engineer, former co-founder of Apex Velocity Racing, the man behind 3 championship-winning cars, a ghost in the industry for the past 5 years after disappearing from the public eye. People had speculated endlessly. Burnout, scandal, tragedy, a secret project. But no one had expected him to show up here, in the Orion garage, at midnight during a qualifying weekend, much less step into an arm wrestling match between a janitor and a mechanic. Yet as he stepped fully into the light, the resemblance was undeniable, older, sharper, worn by years the press never photographed, but unmistakably, Malcolm and Jamal Brooks's estranged father. Jamal's breath hitched. The pain in his arm blurred into nothing as the world narrowed to the man standing just feet away. He hadn't seen Daniel Brooks since he was 14, since the night their father walked out after Malcolm's death and never came back, leaving behind silence, grief, and 2 sons who had needed him most. Jamal's grip faltered, shock breaking through his focus like a lightning bolt. "Dad!" he whispered before he could stop himself. The stranger, Daniel, winced almost imperceptibly at the word, but the mask of control snapped back over his features. Veronica's eyes went wide for a heartbeat, then narrowed with quickly calculating interest. "Oh," she said softly, "that explains a lot." Her tone changed completely, slick, opportunistic, amused. She circled the table like a shark that smelled new blood in the water. "So the janitor has family in high places. How charming." Leon, still pushing on Jamal's arm, looked terrified now. Duarte stared openly. Lucas whispered, "Holy hell." The dynamic in the garage shifted instantly, as if the ground had tilted beneath everyone's feet. Veronica leaned closer to Daniel, smirking. "And what brings you back from retirement, Mr. Brooks? Finally remembered you had a son?" The cruelty was aimed at him now, but the blow landed on Jamal too, reopening old wounds with surgical accuracy. Daniel didn't react, not with anger, not with shame, but his gaze flicked to Jamal's twisted arm, trembling under Leon's weight, and something cold, controlled, dangerous flashed in his eyes. "Release him," Daniel said to Leon. "Now." Leon froze. Veronica laughed. "Oh, this is getting interesting." But beneath her amused facade, a flicker of something else stirred, something like fear. And the crowd felt it too. Because suddenly, this wasn't just a cruel game anymore. This was the beginning of something else. Something none of them understood yet, but all of them felt, deep in their bones, like the moment before a storm breaks. The garage seemed to hold its breath as Daniel Brooks's command, "Release him," hung in the air like a pulled pin from a grenade, and though Leon's hand still crushed down on Jamal's, his resolve wilted under the weight of Daniel's gaze, trembling as uncertainty rippled through his muscles. Veronica sensed the shift immediately and stepped forward with a theatrical scoff, flipping her hair over one shoulder as if to physically repel the authority she couldn't quite overpower. "Oh, come on," she said, her voice dripping with mock disappointment. "Now we're pretending he's in danger? It's an arm wrestling match, not a demolition derby." Daniel ignored her completely, his attention fixed solely on Leon, whose fingers twitched in hesitation. "Let go," Daniel repeated. This time the words came out low, controlled, but with an edge so sharp it sliced through the noise of the garage like a blade. Leon's grip slackened instantly, as if his muscles had received a direct electrical command. He jerked backward, breath quickening, eyes darting between Veronica and Daniel as if unsure whose wrath was more dangerous. Jamal's hand dropped onto the table, his arm throbbing, but the sudden freedom allowed him a shallow breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The spectators stepped back instinctively, creating a widening circle around the three of them, Jamal at the center, Daniel standing tall behind him, and Veronica circling like a predator whose kill had unexpectedly grown fangs. "Well," Veronica said, slow and venomous, "family reunions are always so heartwarming. Do go on." Her smile was dazzling, but it didn't reach her eyes. No, those glittered with something colder calculation, warping into a dangerous curiosity. "How long has it been, Jamal?" she asked, voice honeyed and cruel. 5 years? 10? Did Daddy here finally remember he left something behind? The words pierced deep, reopening wounds Jamal had spent more than a decade hiding beneath silence and work. He said nothing, but the tremor in his fingers betrayed the storm building inside. Daniel didn't speak either, not yet, but the tightening of his jaw told a story to anyone perceptive enough to read it. Veronica laughed softly, circling like a cat batting a wounded mouse. "You know, Mr. Brooks," she continued, savoring the name, "had I known your son was mopping my floors, I might have made tonight's entertainment a bit more elaborate." Jamal shut his eyes, humiliation and rage swirling together, but when he opened them again, Daniel was watching him with an expression Jamal couldn't decode. Regret? Pride? Fear? "He shouldn't be mopping floors," Daniel said quietly but firmly. The crowd shifted. The weight of the words settled like dust motes in the air. Jamal felt something inside him twist anger, flaring with betrayal. Daniel's arrival hadn't felt like rescue. It felt like intrusion, reopening old scars. "Why are you here?" Jamal asked, the words cracking out harsher than he intended. Daniel inhaled slowly, his composure faltering for a moment, as if he'd been waiting years for that question but never found an answer that didn't taste like failure. "I came because—" "No," Veronica cut in sharply, delighted to trample over something personal. "He came because he needs this team." Her gaze swept the garage, grabbing every pair of eyes. "In case any of you have forgotten, Orion is collapsing. Our engines are stalling, our aero is failing, and our board is screaming for results. So what better way to fix things?" She paused, gesturing dramatically toward Daniel. "Than dragging in a washed-up engineer with a tragic past and hoping nostalgia does the rest?" A shocked murmur rolled through the garage. Daniel's expression didn't change, but something in the air around him hardened. "You brought me here, Veronica," he reminded her, his tone cold enough to frost over metal. "Don't pretend otherwise." Veronica shrugged, utterly unbothered. "Of course I did. You have name recognition. A little genius left, perhaps. And the shareholders adore a comeback story." She leaned in, her smile razor-sharp. "But what I didn't know was that your son was here, cleaning bathrooms." Her gaze snapped back to Jamal, pinning him like an insect. "Which makes this whole situation absolutely delicious." Jamal's hands balled into fists. He felt exposed, stripped open, gutted in front of people who already saw him as little more than background noise. But then, unexpectedly, Daniel stepped between him and Veronica. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was simply a shift, a presence blocking her venom with a shield she hadn't anticipated. "Enough," Daniel said. "You've done more damage in 10 minutes than some do in a lifetime." Veronica let out a soft, incredulous laugh. "Damage? Oh, please. If your son can't handle a little teasing, he's in the wrong place." Daniel's eyes darkened. "This isn't teasing. It's cruelty." Veronica's expression flickered, annoyance, surprise, then something sharper. "Careful," she warned, her voice velvet-wrapped steel. "You're speaking to the woman who controls your contract." Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice to a dangerous calm that forced Veronica's smile to falter. "You don't control me. You hired me." A hush fell. Veronica's confidence wavered, but she quickly masked it with another cold laugh. "Fine," she said, shifting tactics. "Then answer me this." Her gaze drilled into Jamal again. "If he's your son, what exactly is he doing wasting his life with a mop?" The question tore through the room sharp, humiliating, cruel. Jamal stiffened, eyes flashing with something volatile. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, image of regret flickering across his face. Then he said the words no one expected, his voice steady but weighted with ghosts. "Because he took responsibility for the things I abandoned." The garage went silent. Jamal stared at Daniel, stunned, breath caught between disbelief and pain. Veronica blinked once, thrown off just long enough for the perfect crack in her armor to show. "And," Daniel added, turning to the crowd, "because he has more talent in his hands than half the people here." He spoke not like a father defending a son, but like an expert revealing a hidden masterpiece. "He understands machines intuitively. It's innate. It's rare." A murmur spread. Heads turned. People looked at Jamal with a new kind of curiosity. Not pity, not mockery, but interest. Respect brewing like a storm. Veronica stiffened, recognizing the shift and hating it. "Oh no," she snapped, regaining her sharpness. "We are not turning the janitor into some kind of prodigy." Daniel stepped even closer, towering, resolute. "You don't have a choice," he said. "Not anymore." "And why?" Veronica spat. "Is that?" Daniel's answer wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. "Because he's the only one who can save your team." The garage erupted, not with laughter, but with shock. And for the first time all night, Veronica Hale faltered, truly faltered, as the ground began to shift beneath her perfectly polished heels. The garage exploded in whispers as Daniel's words, "He's the only one who can save your team," rolled through the space like a detonation, and Veronica Hale, for the first time that night, didn't have a retort ready on her tongue. Instead, she stood frozen, her pupils shrinking, her posture stiffening as the implications crashed down on her like debris in slow motion, while Jamal sat at the center of the storm, arms still throbbing from the match, heart pounding with disbelief, the echoes of humiliation and pride warring inside him. Veronica blinked rapidly, collecting herself with visible effort, then forced a laugh brittle enough to crack. "You're joking," she said, voice trembling just slightly. "The janitor? The mop boy? Save us? Don't insult my intelligence." But the crowd didn't laugh with her. Instead, they exchanged uneasy glances, because something had shifted, something fundamental, and Daniel Brooks, the man whose name was woven into championship legends, stepped forward with a calm that swallowed the room whole. "Your cars aren't failing because of lack of talent," he said evenly. "They're failing because no one on this team can hear what the engines are telling them, except him." He nodded toward Jamal. "He grew up listening to machines. It's in his blood." The crowd murmured again, this time with genuine curiosity, and Lucas stepped closer, studying Jamal not as background noise, but as someone new entirely. "Wait," Lucas said softly. Is that why you fixed the calibration trolley last month? You didn't even look at the manual. Jamal flushed, unsure what to say, but Duarte added, and the torque wrench, the hydraulic lift, the alignment on Bay 3. I thought you just liked fiddling with stuff. The realization spread like wildfire, and suddenly the garage was seeing months, years of quiet, unnoticed repairs through new eyes. Veronica's jaw clenched. This is absurd, she snapped, voice cracking like a stressed beam. Even if he has some mechanical intuition, that doesn't make him a miracle worker. We need results, not fairy tales. Daniel's eyes hardened. Then let him prove it. Silence swallowed the garage. Jamal's heart skipped. Veronica's nostrils flared. Fine, she said, spitting the word like poison. Prove it. Right here. Right now. She jabbed a manicured finger toward the half-assembled Orion F1 car behind them. If he's such a prodigy, let him diagnose the issue our entire engineering division failed to solve today. If he gets it right, she paused, forcing her voice steady, I'll retract everything I said tonight. She wasn't offering dignity. She was betting on his failure. Daniel met Jamal's eyes for the first time, not with pressure, but with a question. You can walk away. Jamal inhaled slowly. The humiliation, the anger, the ache in his arm, the years of silence. They swirled until something clicked into place. He rose from the chair. Leon stumbled backward, making space. Veronica crossed her arms like a queen preparing to witness an execution. The mechanic stepped aside as Jamal approached the car, the sleek black and red chassis gleaming beneath the fluorescent lights like a creature holding its breath. He placed his palm on the carbon fiber nose, feeling the temperature, the vibration, the hum of a machine not alive yet somehow breathing. Memories flooded him. Late nights with Malcolm tuning engines that should have been dead, listening for the tiny inconsistencies others overlooked. He closed his eyes and listened. The garage was silent. Even Veronica didn't dare speak. After several long seconds, Jamal moved to the rear of the car, crouching near the power unit housing. He pressed his ear close, fingertips drifting to the ERS coolant line. Then he frowned. Something was wrong, subtle, hidden, but wrong. Your thermal management mapping is misaligned, he said at last, voice clear and steady. The sensors are reading stable, but the coolant flow is inconsistent. The left side microvalve is sticking intermittently, probably heat warp. Engineers blinked. Then one bolted toward the diagnostic tablet, fingers flying across the screen. No way, someone whispered. The reading flashed, and it was exactly what Jamal said. Exactly. Gasps burst across the garage. Lucas swore under his breath. Duarte muttered, Impossible! Veronica's face drained of color. Daniel allowed himself the smallest exhale of pride, but Jamal wasn't finished. Also, he added, standing tall, your MGU-K is misfiring under load. It's not a hardware failure, it's software. The recovery curve is out of sync with the engine's torque band. You're losing milliseconds because the energy deployment is stuttering. More engineers rushed forward, pulling up the mapping, eyes widening as the truth lit up the screen like fireworks. He's right, one whispered. He's actually right. How did he? He didn't even look at the data. He just knew. The garage buzzed with stunned awe. Slowly, all eyes turned to Veronica. Her face twisted shock, fury, disbelief, fear. A tornado of emotions warring behind her frozen smile. She opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. This proves nothing, she finally managed, but her voice was hoarse, weak, the voice of a woman watching her own kingdom collapse beneath her heels. Luck. Guesswork. Veronica! Daniel stepped forward, his tone carrying the authority of a man who had built legends. He did what your entire team failed to do all day. Veronica's facade cracked. The crowd watched, breathless. Jamal stood steady. For the first time, he wasn't shrinking. He wasn't invisible. He wasn't the janitor in the shadows. He was the one person who saved the night. Veronica swallowed hard, turning her gaze toward Jamal with something bordering on fear. "What do you want?" she whispered. It wasn't mockery. It wasn't arrogance. It was surrender. Jamal felt every eye on him. The weight of the choice settled on his shoulders, not heavy but grounding. He didn't want her job. He didn't want revenge. He wanted dignity, justice. So he said, calm and unwavering, "Respect." The word echoed, strong, final. Veronica flinched as if struck. Daniel nodded approvingly. Duarte smiled softly. Lucas whispered, "Hell yeah." Jamal continued, voice gaining strength. "Not just for me. For everyone in this garage. No more threats. No more humiliation. You lead. You don't crush." The silence afterward felt like dawn breaking. Slowly, painfully, Veronica nodded. "Fine," she breathed. "You have it." But Daniel wasn't finished. He placed a hand on Jamal's shoulder. "And you," he said loudly for all to hear, "are joining the engineering team, effective immediately." The garage erupted, not in chaos, but in cheers, applause, disbelief, turning into celebration as Jamal stood surrounded by people who finally saw him. Veronica staggered back, stunned, dethroned not by force but by truth. Jamal met her gaze one last time. "You said some people were born to own the floor others mop," he said quietly. "Turns out we were standing on different floors." And with that, the night ended not in humiliation, but in justice clean, sharp, and unmistakably his.